And from the world headquarters of RT America and our nation's capital, hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. All right, let's do this exercise together. You ready? Take the U.S. Revolutionary War, add the length of the Civil War. Now take our involvement in World War I, and for good measure, add World War II. And you know what you have? Approximately 17 and a half years of U.S. combat. Why is that number important? Because by comparison, today, officially, on this day, the war in Afghanistan has now lasted exactly 18 years. Think about that. The four most important wars in our nation's history were shorter than this one war that even today, our reporters and our politicians ignore. More on that coming up in just a little bit. We're going to begin with another hypocrisy that generally goes unnoticed in the mainstream media, where our politicians and our reporters are also very quick to point out when China asserts its authority in Taiwan or in the South China Sea, or criticizes Russia for its reunification with Crimea, which are legitimate stories, by the way, worthy of coverage all. But here's where we as journalists fall short when we cover these stories. We make it sound like those incursions are happening in a complete vacuum without ever mentioning that our own government, the government of the United States, is just as guilty, if not more so, than both China and Russia combined when it comes to interfering in the affairs of other nations. This stuff is important. It's the truth, right? There is no clearer example of this than in Latin America, where even as recently as 2009, our CIA fomented a coup that literally removed a democratically elected president and replaced him with one beholden to Washington. That happened, by the way, under the Hillary Clinton stewardship of the U.S. State Department, lest you think that one party is better than the other when it comes to this type of thing. No, they all seem to do it. So, by the way, what's happened in Honduras since this interference? Important question. An economy that was improving before the coup is now in shambles, literally. The people of Honduras are angry. They've taken to the streets, or they're emigrating to the United States, causing President Trump to refer to Honduras as one of those crap hole countries. But if Honduras is a crap hole country, he used a different word, as you know. I'm not comfortable using it. If it is a crap hole country, it's because of U.S. policies that made it a crap hole country. By the way, the meddling by our CIA and State Department is not confined to Honduras. This list is long and exhaustive. Venezuela, Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Indonesia, Greece, Panama, Laos, Cambodia, and more that we know about, and more that we don't know about. Look, this is not to say that the actions of Russia or the actions of China should not be critically analyzed. They should. The question is, should it be done in a vacuum? In a vacuum, with no mention of how other countries, including our own, often do the same thing. See, that's perspective, context. Giving a complete global perspective with context would be a fair assessment, fair coverage, fair commentary. Anything else is at best ignorant. Because I guess you could say, well, we didn't know that we did this or that others do this. Or at worst, if you do know and you report it that way anyway, hackery. So why do we bring this to your attention? Because it appears there is another country where this type of thing has happened again. And where is it? That's coming up in Rick's List 1. This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where we do believe it is time to do news again. Here's a list of the questions we think you're going to be asking tomorrow. What country is now in turmoil following what appears to be, again, UN interference? We'll tell you. Will Turkey unleash a hellacious attack on Kurds in Syria In fact, we have breaking news on this we're going to share with you in just a minute. Has the BBC gone too far in its criticism of President Trump? We'll break that down for you, but we're going to begin or kick off our A block tonight with a look at another country in Latin America that seemingly and suddenly is beholden to Washington. Ecuador. It's in turmoil. Indigenous groups, among others, protesting austerity measures. Much of this taking place not long after the Trump administration squeezed Ecuador to turn over Julian Assange. So what's going on? We want to know. We thought you might too. Tonight, a special report from Ecuador. Our correspondent is Nick O'Donovan.
The air is still heavy here with tear gas and smoke. This is the aftermath of what has just happened here. Massive clashes between protesters and the Ecuadorian police. Protesters are mainly students. They started peacefully in the early hours of the morning, but around midday, and in a split second, they turned violent. It was, as far as we saw, the first group throwing stones, just like these, even bigger rocks and bottles to the officers, and these immediately responding with tear gas and sound bombs. Then we saw heavy vehicles coming in, and that didn't deter the protesters that even continued to throw rocks at the vehicles, and we definitely saw what looked like a battle, what looked like a war scene here in downtown Quito. Let's take a look at those images.
Es imposible.
Our team was affected by sound bombs and tear gas, and flying rocks were a constant threat after 3 hours of violent clashes between protesters and police. The streets of Quito looked more like a war zone, with rocks, bottles and tear gas cartridges scattered everywhere. So these have definitely been violent and heavy protests, but people we spoke to are telling us this is just the beginning. They're waiting for the biggest protest to happen on Wednesday. That's when indigenous leaders from all around the country are going to come here to the capital and are going to protest next to the presidential palace. We've been there before this morning, and what we saw was boarded wire and heavy military presence. This is police. Over there, it's the Ecuadorian military. So it could be the start of a very violent week here in Ecuador. Nicholas O'Donovan for the news with Rick Sanchez.
Well, tonight we also have this breaking news. It appears Turkey is ready to invade Syria. In fact, there are reports that the bombing has already begun. The White House appears to be sending out some mixed signals on all of this regarding Turkey. So last night, in a statement, it said that Turkey will invade northern Syria. The White House said that, right? But then later, it said that it will not tolerate, endorse, or join in on Turkey's attack on Syria. And just today, just a little while ago, Newsweek is reporting that on a call last night between President Trump and the president of Turkey, Mr. Trump got, according to Newsweek, quote, rolled or dominated by Mr. Erdogan. The magazine is also suggesting that the attack on the Kurds will move them, the Kurds, to either side then with Syrian President Bashar Assad or into the camp with the Russians. Seeming to imply that they're going to run in one direction or the other, most likely the Russians. This story's got a lot of moving parts. Fascinating story, really. Joining us now to take us through this is RT correspondent Rachel Blevins. Can I start with Afghanistan, because I just find it interesting. 18 years of war. I think you heard me mention it's more than the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II combined. And yet, we're not even addressing it or talking about it as a country. What does that say to you?
Well, it says that the war isn't coming to an end anytime soon, and it also says that the enemy that we went in there to defeat, the Taliban, is more powerful now than it has been at any point since the war began, and that's not something that a lot of networks and politicians really like to talk about. And you know, it's interesting because we saw 11 months of peace talks in Afghanistan with the Taliban before President Trump suddenly pulled out last month and said that he wasn't going to have it because they were being violent. Yet if you look at who's being violent in Afghanistan, violence on behalf of the United States and its allies has skyrocketed in the last few years. 2018 saw the greatest number of civilian casualties since 2009, and then this year marked the first year that the U.S. and its allies killed more civilians in Afghanistan than the Taliban did.
That's amazing. It really is. And, you know, it's kind of a shame because we were, as you alluded to, reporting just about a month ago that there were Taliban talks and that there was a breakthrough. And then all of a sudden it's, you know, crickets, and now it looks like there's no end in sight. Let's move over to Syria, if we could. You heard what I just read about what the White House's statement was. They seem to be saying to Turkey, we don't want you to do this, but if you do, look, we throw our hands up. What, as far as you can tell, what is the White House strategy on this?
Well, it's interesting because they say that they're pulling around 100 special forces back from the northern border in Syria. And they came out and they said, well, we've defeated ISIS there. ISIS is 100% defeated according to President Trump, so we don't need those forces to be there. But then at the same time, they're saying, well, if there is some violence there, then we also don't want them to be there for that. So they seem to be sending mixed signals. But President Trump did speak out about this on Twitter, of course, and he specifically took to Twitter where he said that he defended this decision by writing that the U.S. has been in Syria for far too long, and it is time for us to get out of these ridiculous, endless wars and to bring our soldiers home. However, it's important to note that these special forces that are being taken away from the border, they're not coming on a plane and coming home. They're simply being relocated to another part of Syria from as far as we can tell.
I was noticing that the Republicans who are defending Trump on the impeachment deal are going after him. I mean, with a fury on this decision, apparently, to pull 1,000 troops out of Syria and let the Kurds do as they wish, if that's how they interpret it.
Right, exactly. Well, and you see, you know, this puts the Kurdish forces in Syria at risk, and the Kurds have been the ones who have been a really strong U.S. ally in going after ISIS. So we do have a lot of Republicans that are coming in and saying, wait a second, this opens the door so that Turkey can go in and do whatever they want with these forces that have been working with the U.S. And of course, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has been a very strong voice in this, and he's actually stepped away from President Trump on this. He also took to Twitter where he said that this move ensures that there will be an ISIS comeback. He said it forces the Kurds to align with Assad and Iran. It destroys Turkey's relationship with the U.S. Congress, and most importantly, he claims it will be a stain on America's honor for abandoning the Kurds. Now, President Trump has heard all of this. He's heard all of these concerns. And so he took to Twitter once again, and it was really interesting how he changed things up. He spoke out and he said... So now it's Trump versus... Right, so now Trump has to defend this, and he's got to say, oh, wait, we got to defend the Kurds. And he wrote, quote, if Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate Turkey's economy. Now, this is interesting because he's bringing out his unmatched wisdom, not to question that at all, but he's essentially saying there are limits, but he's not telling Turkey what those limits are, yet at the same time he's pulling U.S. forces back and saying, okay, just in case there's some violence here, we don't want our forces here. But he's right. I think if you were to ask or poll the American people, they would say we want out of that war just as we do Afghanistan, and at least he's apparently making efforts in that regard. By the way, Rick Sanchez, in my unmatched wisdom, thank you for that great report. Thank you. Tonight it appears that China may be backing off on its ongoing trade and business relationship with Iran. China has for months now been letting on that even though the U.S. bans any country from doing business with Iran, and by the way, think about that for a moment. Nobody's allowed to do business with Iran unless we, the United States, say that they can. But I digress. The Chinese have been ignoring Washington's pleas or requests to not do business with Iran. Maybe, though, until now. Has something changed? And if so, what is it? What gives? Here on this story is RT correspondent Yulia Shapovalova.
On Sunday, October 6, the Iranian oil minister announced that the China National Petroleum Corporation, or CNPC, had withdrawn from a deal worth $5 billion to develop part of a huge offshore natural gas field in Iran. Earlier, the French company Total also pulled out of the agreement due to US sanctions. The South Pass deal was concluded after the 2015 nuclear agreement between Iran and several world powers and is now suffering from the US pressure campaign against Tehran. Under the terms of the initial transaction, Total was to receive a 5.1% stake, CNPC 30%, and the Iranian company Petropars 19.9%. With the departure of Total and the CNPC, Petropars has been left to develop the South Pass deposits alone. Iran's oil minister Bijan Zanganeh said that the China National Petroleum Corporation was no longer participating in the project. He did not specify the reasons for the exit. Officials in Beijing have not yet commented on the reports either. However, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif complained about the U.S. campaign against Tehran and its impact on foreign investment. Earlier, Oil Minister Zanganeh announced that Iran would use all available methods to export its oil, adding that it is fully entitled to do so.
We will use all possible means of exporting our oil, and we will not yield to American pressure, because oil export is Iran's legal right.
The minister also added that Iran wants to improve relations with other countries in the region. Crude oil exports from Iran fell by more than 80% after the U.S. reimposed sanctions on the country last November. That followed President Trump's decision to unilaterally pull out of Iran's 2015 nuclear accord with world powers. Iran has the world's second largest reserves of natural gas, but it has not yet become a major exporter because of the international sanctions that have been imposed on the country for decades. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran confirmed on Sunday that the country would further reduce its obligations under a nuclear agreement if the European side did not fulfill its promise to protect Iran's economy from U.S. sanctions. Yulia Shapovalova for the news of Rick Sanchez.
Try to imagine this, but the media landscape around the globe isn't quite what it is right now here in the United States. Take, for example, the UK, where the type of political punditry that you see from the left and from the right, from Fox News, from MSNBC, simply isn't allowed. See, that sort of only pull for your horse reporting is actually regulated there, much the same way it used to be regulated here. That is thanks to the UK's media watchdog Ofcom. The mission of Ofcom is to represent citizens and consumers by promoting competition and to protect the public from harmful or offensive material. Case in point, a recent ruling against the BBC. Yeah, against the BBC in the UK. Ofcom found that a news presenter named Naga Muchetti had broken regulations by certain comments she made on air about Donald Trump. Well, now that ruling has been reversed, but the Director General of Ofcom is criticizing even the ruling. He seems to be suggesting, by the way, long story short, that the BBC may have tried to influence the investigation somehow, and that is not proper. Or is it not right proper for the BBC to be doing? Joining us now, veteran reporter Ben Swan. You know, Ben, this brings a couple of issues into play. One of them is the difference between the BBC and our own country, where we used to have something called the Fairness Doctrine, and we just decided to get rid of it. And now every time you turn on the TV, it's just a bunch of people fighting or giving their perspective. You know, but also the fact that in the Trump era, covering news is difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult, but it shouldn't be as difficult as it's made out to be, because look, you do it every single night, Rick, and you don't seem to be even breaking a sweat, right? Because you're calling balls and strikes. It's very simple when the end agenda is to report truth, and wherever that leads you, right? Obviously, because of what we've created in this country in terms of this left-right paradigm, we've kind of created a self-defeating cycle here, meaning that instead of it being that networks are telling viewers what to believe, it's actually the other way around now. It's gotten to the point where viewers go to networks to be told what they already believe is true.
Right.
And if the networks don't give them that, then they have a problem with the networks. So the networks can no longer even just be honest and call things as they are, because the viewers won't allow it, because the viewers demand that they respond according to how they're expected to respond.
Yeah, this woman, Naga Machete, I looked at her comments. Compared to what they do in this country, it's not that bad at all. But she was making a comment. She was saying, look, as a person of color, I feel like some of the things that President Trump has said. She said, every time I've been told to go back to where I came from for that, I think it's embedded in racism. And she was saying that that's what President Trump was saying. Now, she didn't source it. She didn't offer it properly. But, you know, in the end, here's what I think. You know, guys like you and guys like me, veteran reporters, I went to the University of Minnesota. I'm very proud of my degree in journalism. I stick to that calling balls and strikes things. I adhere to the principles that I was taught. Rachel Maddow's not trained as a journalist. Sean Hannity's not trained as a journalist. Tucker Carlson's not a journalist. 90% of the people watch on television today, they're not journalists. There's somebody they found somewhere, they thought they had a great personality or a nice smile, and they put them on TV. I think that's part of the problem as well, don't you?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It is part of the problem. But I think the other problem is that we have reached such an incredible moment. And what we're going through right now with the talk of impeachment, I think has taken a polarized system to even further heights, because what you're seeing now is a truly remarkable thing where, depending on which network you're watching, flipping back and forth between CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, ABC, CBS, it's all going to be the same, right? Yep. That is the omission of information. It's not even anymore just that they're kind of skewing things their way. It is a complete and utter omission. Those on the left in this country will not talk about legitimate issues of corruption in Ukraine. They're not going to discuss it. On the right, they are not going to discuss impropriety of the call that Trump is making. And so if you are a viewer, there is so much information being intentionally left out of these discussions that most people are become completely ill-informed. And as a journalist, I think you would say the same thing. That's maybe the most painful part. I don't care where people fall in terms of how they view this stuff. I care that people are viewing it based upon ignorance and a lack of information, and that's what's sad to me.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And in the end, that's the onus on us, is to be able to do that for people, and we're not providing them with that, at least at this particular point in time. Great conversation, Ben, as usual. Appreciate having you on.
Rick, thanks.
And now this. You've heard the expression, right? When pigs fly, right? Well, I am here to report tonight, at least as far as we know, pigs still cannot fly. There you go. But you know what they can do? There's apparently a new study out, some research that has been done. Get this. Pigs can use tools, just like chimps. And I guess, well, us. RT's Natasha Sweet brings home the pork tonight with this report.
Scientists discovered wild pigs using tools, and it turns out it's all centered on a mother's nesting habits. Check out this mama pig using a tool to dig. Well, it's a recent discovery that one scientist wanted to look more into. In 2015, ecologist Meredith Root Bernstein noticed a Vinyasa warty pig, an endangered species native to the Philippines, pick up a piece of bark with its mouth. It then began digging, moving the soil all around. After Bernstein couldn't find any research on pigs and tools, well, she decided to do her own. Although it turns out she had to wait until the next spring to find any similar behaviors she had initially seen. There again, the females began nesting. In an experiment, scientists even added in easier to use tools like a spatula. In 2016, the pigs were seen using tools 4 times, and in 2017, they used the tools another 7 times. The spatula was only used twice. Fernando Dino Gutierrez, the president of the Philippine Conservation Talark Foundation, believes it's very possible that the Vinyasa warty pigs use tools. In fact, he witnessed a group of wild pigs pushing rocks toward an electric fence to test it. He said as soon as they push and the rocks make contact, they would wait for the clicking sound or the absence thereof. Clicking means the wires are hot and they will back off and not cross. No sound means it is safe to investigate what's beyond the wire. They're smart little buggers. They are indeed. And Bernstein is continuing her research, trying to figure out why some pigs would use tools if their snouts were just as effective. And she believes it could be a cultural thing, similar to how chimpanzees hold hands during grooming. Less efficient, but of course, very sweet. In Los Angeles, Natasha Sweet, RT.
You know, there's been a lot of protests around the world. It seems like in countries like France and Haiti, and we showed you just a little while ago what was going on in Honduras and Ecuador. But tonight we want to take you back to a place where the protests have been truly relentless. We really don't want to take our eyes off of Hong Kong for you, where today there is some video that seems to indicate that the protesters are not in any way relenting. Described as young people upset that they can't get the type of jobs that their parents and their grandparents were able to achieve because the Hong Kong economy, well, isn't what it used to be. They're now doing all they can to make the Hong Kong economy, it seems, even worse. In fact, that is actually what's going on. The real estate market has never been worse than it is right now in Hong Kong as a result, say experts, of these protests that you've been seeing. They are accomplishing that by apparently increasing their attacks on what they, the protesters, consider to be the establishment, right? Metro stations, subway stations, mass communications, the police, even private and public property, all under attack. But one of the worst examples that, by the way, could end up hurting the cause of the protesters as much as anything else occurred just this weekend. And it happened when they attacked a counter-protester who simply expressed an opinion that is different from theirs. Now, in America, we call that un-American, right? Everyone's entitled to their opinion. Watch in this video as a man suggests that all should unite for the good of China. You see right there, as soon as a journalist starts to take his video, that they take the opportunity to attack this guy. He is punched repeatedly. There it is, slowed down, punched in the face, while reporters are taking the video, almost as if they want that shown, right? Now, are protesters getting a little too brazen in their demonstrations? Is this going to come back to haunt them? Many Hong Kong experts are suggesting that's the case. And they say that it may now be just a matter of time with this continuing and with the protesters not relenting before Beijing is forced to go in, to send in reinforcements of some type, to be perhaps more aggressive with the protesters. That's what some experts inside Hong Kong are saying. We'll follow it for you. That's our news. Thanks so much for being with us. Be here and join us tomorrow when we're going to be joined by George Galloway from the UK to try and give us his perspective on the Hong Kong situation as it is right now. Also, if you've got some friends looking for a newscast not like the rest of them, tell them we're here, tell them we're different, or tell them they can catch us on YouTube or on Pluto. We'll see you again tomorrow when it'll be time to do news again.